Bad symbiote. No.
Hey there, fellow maker! Welcome down to the shop. I've got a fun project today. Right now, Venom is about to come out, but from where you're sitting, it just came out. Maybe you went and saw it. I haven't seen it yet, but I saw the trailer and I want to make this tube. This is a big tube thing. They keep the symbiote in. I have some fun ideas for this symbiote. We'll get to that later, but first, I want to start with the tube part of it. It's probably going to be made mostly out of plastic, maybe some foam. But to get started, I've got these concrete casting tubes from the hardware store. I've got this big one. This is 8 inches in diameter, about 8 inches. And I think I'm going to build most of my pieces around this. And I might also use this round form to take strips of plastic or a big sheet of plastic to bend it over there. I'm not quite sure how that's all gonna come together, but I'm gonna get started and we'll see how it turns out. Let's do it. My reference images are actually from the trailer. I just brought it up on YouTube, took some screenshots, threw this into Photoshop, printed it out on multiple pages and taped it together. I think this is actually a little bit big, but it'll give me a pretty close estimate of all of the proportions on this fella. I also have a couple of color photos to help me out later. These are from 2 different parts of the trailer, so they're slightly different angles. This one, the tube has opened. This is the tube closed. And I think that's what I'm gonna go for. Unless I have trouble making that tube, then I'll do this thing. To get started, I'm gonna get a piece of wood or potentially a piece of plastic to act as the base. We can build everything on top of that. I have many materials to pick from, but I think I'm gonna go with MDF. I have this 1/4 inch thick MDF right here. It's big enough for what I need. It's plenty cheap. I have lots of it. So I'm gonna grab this guy and cut it down to rough dimension over on the table saw. All right, so this is the base for my tube. It's a little tinier than the reference here, but I think this is a good size. And then now I wanna figure out the proportions of these parts, how wide this tube ought to be, and I can lay that all out right on this piece of wood. The overall length of this is 28 inches. That gap is around 19. Let's make that 18, just to make easy math. It gives us 10 inches, so 5 inches on either side for these end caps. 5 inches there. So this is an end cap. This is an end cap. And that should give us 18 inches between them all. Right on. So that'll be the gap, and then I have to figure out these end cap things right here. This part is solid, this part is clear, and then this part is solid. So I think building these solid pieces first is gonna be critical. And then this also has like a groove down the middle of it. Then this part is clear, but it overlaps this part a little bit, but this is how wide that part needs to be. And then this part on the outside will be last. I think I'm gonna make that out of foam so I could wrap it around. The next thing to do is cut my big tube. I just remembered that I want to cut the bottom off this to fit my platform before cutting through the whole thing, so I stopped. If I get a flat piece of wood or something, like a 2x4. So that's the mark right there. I'm going to rotate this until it lines up with my 2x4, and then I'll just draw a line across, and then we'll rotate around to the other mark, and again, draw a line. All right, don't need that. This is going here on our base, but I'm going to cut this into segments. So here's my parts, all sanded and nice and smooth. And then there's going to be a glass piece on this gap here, so I need a lip under both of these, and I think some styrene plastic would be perfect for that. Yeah, that'll do. I just need to sand this a little bit so that it's got some bite. The inside of this has like a waxy coating on it. So I'm gonna make double sure that I sand this really well. Got my super glue for this. I think that will work. And these are little clamps to hold it in place while the glue sets. Boop. This part, the thinner part here, there is a lip on the inside of it, and I think I'm just gonna put a piece of foam in there. I've got a couple of pieces here. I have, this is about 1/2 inch, this is about 1/4 inch, and yeah, we'll just cut some thin strips to cover up the inside of this, make it look real pretty. I've got some contact cement on the back of this and the back of this. They've had about 5–10 minutes to dry, and now I can stick them together. There we go, I can press everything down. This piece can go right here, and there's a little lip on the inside, just like in my reference, and that's where the plastic bit will go. For these wider pieces here, I actually cut out some thinner 1/4 inch EVA foam. That's gonna go on the inside here as well, just so we have a nice clean surface on the inside. So same thing, a little bit of barge, a little bit of sticking. I'm cutting out some more of this really thin styrene, and this will be to skin the outside of these cardboard parts. The cardboard did a great job of getting us the right shape, but the surface finish on it is less than ideal. So we're gonna cover it with something nice and smooth. You can see I just score the plastic here and then fold it, and ta-da! So we've got some that are 2 inches wide. Those are gonna cover this guy here. This ring here has a crease down the middle as if 2 pieces were locked together. So to get that, I'm gonna butt 2 pieces of styrene together. But to get a nice gap between them, I'm actually going to sand a couple of edges, the meeting edges, so that there is a groove between them. With my sanding stick, I can come in here and put a nice bevel all along this edge. This is about 100 grit. I'll come in with a 220 grit to smooth it out a bit, and then it should be good to get glued down. And then I'm gonna spray accelerant on the plastic, like that. And as I stick it down, it should cure immediately. Now when I glue the other one up next to it, so long as I put the right edges together, I'll have a nice gap between the 2 of them. Look at that. We have that nice little gap there. I find it way easier to cut a little bit extra and then cut it flush than to try and get the lengths perfect on the first try. And this styrene cuts so easily. I could even come in if there's a little bit overhang, and I can just kind of peel it a little bit, just like that. There are a lot of things I need to think about before gluing everything together, and one of them is light. In this one particular reference, it looks like there's some lights inside the tube. So I'm gonna add lights. And I happen to have some LEDs right here. Now these are 12-volt LEDs. You can run them off a 9-volt battery, which is easy. They don't need to illuminate anything, they just need to be decoration. These have lines on them where they recommend you cut them. That way you don't damage any of the circuits going to either LED. So I'm gonna cut it right along that line. And I can wire up 2 rows. I think I want 2 rows in this. It looks like that is how it's set up here. So these are gonna be positioned kind of like that when they're together. And I need to connect the ends of those leads. So I just need a couple little bits of wire. And I'm actually gonna use black wire for both of them so that you don't see anything in our enclosure. So let's make just a short little jump wire there. Throw it on the floor, get a new piece of wire.
Don't forget to do that step.
That's a very important step. Throw it on the floor, get a new one. This one's much better. This little wire here is gonna get a little solder put on the tips of it, and I'm also gonna put solder on all of the pads on here to make it easy to join everything. Gonna put a little solder on the tip of the soldering iron, and then just tin the end of that on both sides, of course. And I'll do the same thing on these little pads, just leaving a little bit of solder right on there. Now all I have to do is heat them both up, and they will solder together, just like that. Now I'm gonna hold this with tweezers so I don't burn myself, and there we go. Boop. Look at that. Well, there we go. So there we go. We have 2 rows lit together. They're staggered. These actually have an adhesive on the back of them. So I'll just peel this off and stick it down to my foam. The wires are going to be run outside of this to connect to the other side, so I need to drill a hole. Now this will protrude out the side, but I'm not too worried about that. This part here will end up being covered later, so it'll look good. I goofed up. This should be the red wire, this should be the black wire, so these don't match. It's not a problem, I can just hook them up opposite, but I'm gonna leave myself a note and just draw some black Sharpie on this red wire, like that, so I remember this later. I don't have red tape, but I have pink tape. I'll leave a tiny piece of pink tape on the black wire. So I'm just cleaning up the edges on all of the pieces here. All of the cardboard is covered except for some of these thin exposed edges. Not a big deal, except it's a little fuzzy, and I want to be able to sand it nice and smooth. So what I'll do is I have some super glue here. This is really thin super glue, really runny, and I'm going to carefully just put a little bit on the edge, just like that, and it will soak into that cardboard. Got a paper towel here, just clean up the excess, make sure I didn't dribble any where I don't want it. And you can either let that dry or hit it with a little accelerant to make it cure really fast. Again, just wipe off any excess. Now this exposed edge is nice and rigid so that we can sand it smooth. I just have some 220 here, sand that nice and smooth. Move on to the next step. It's time to start thinking about how this is all gonna go together. Slept on it, thought about it, trimmed my beard, and here's what I came up with. So I wanna be able to attach these pieces, but I have to figure out when I'm gonna paint them versus when they're all gonna get attached, because there are a couple different colors in there. I got these aluminum corner angle doodads here. Just cut them to length super quick on the old bandsaw. And they're going to attach to this base here. These parts go in here, and then they get screwed in so that I can unscrew them for paint. That way I can assemble everything, make sure everything fits correctly, and then paint it. So I'm just putting a center punch in there to make it easier to drill the hole. Got a little bit of cutting oil here. Not really necessary for aluminum, but it does make it go a lot easier. I'll be using these little wood screws, and they've got a little countersink action going on there. The holes I drilled through the aluminum and the wood are smaller for the thread, so the aluminum I need to drill out a little bit bigger. And that should be big enough for the screw to go through. It is. The only thing we have left to do on those is to use this countersink bit to put a little chamfer on the back so that those screw heads are more flush. Now when that screw head goes in there, it's nice and flush. Cool, these are all installed. There are no more pointy bits on there. So here's the thought. These pieces, they bowed out a little bit during construction, so when I put them in here, I can tuck them back to their close to original size, but more importantly, they should match one another. So if I tuck those in there, these look pretty well lined up. So what I'll do is I'll get these nice and lined up and then put screws through the side to hold them in place, and then I can take those off and then reattach them after painting. That's where it's gonna go in there. Now, if I line this guy up exactly where I want it, I realize that that hole is way too low. It needs to be up here. That's okay, I can fix that. I'm just gonna mark them with a drill bit, and that's where I'll drill those out. Not through the LEDs. I miss the LEDs. That goes in there and lines up. Hey, that feels really good. So I'll just do that on the rest of them. This fella is nice and secure. This part is gonna go next to it. I have some layout lines here, but to get it to work well with the next step, which will be the clear part, I cut out some pieces of styrene. I cut them on the table saw so that they are exactly the same width. And then these can be used as spacers all the way around, like so. This way, both of these parts and this gap are exactly the same all the way around. Now I can drill in this part.
Hey Bill.
Yeah.
Reviews for Venom are starting to come out.
Oh, cool. Let's see how. Just gonna ignore that. Get back to the build. I want to make an end cap. I'm going to use EVA foam for this. So I'm just tracing the profile of this end, and then that can be used to cut up my foam. Ta-da! And cut. There we go. Then this will go right over that. So according to the reference, the LEDs don't have a white strip behind them. This is just what we happen to have here in the shop. So I am drawing on this with a Sharpie and covering everything except for the actual LEDs. This Sharpie here will never be touched. This is all going to be enclosed, so I'm not too worried about how durable it will be. All of our parts here, I think, are ready to start painting them before we start putting everything together. The things we just Sharpied, I want to cover them so they don't get hit with primer. So I cut out a strip of masking tape, and I'm just going to lay that down. There we go. Now we can take all these parts and spray them with primer. This is a combination of gold and silver paints to get kind of a champagne color. For these parts anyway. Everything else I think will be a gunmetal.
While I'm working on that, thought I'd take a moment to thank our patrons. It's because of your support that we're able to do these amazing projects, work in this crazy awesome new shop, and support an entire team of human beings. Not only do you have me, but of course Brittany working really hard on some awesome projects. We also have Paige. She makes sure all the wheels are turning behind the scenes. And we have Everett. He's in charge of making sure we can keep the lights on. Thank you so much for your support over the years. It makes so much of a difference to us. And not only do you get really cool things like access to behind the scenes vlogs and extra credit build videos and early access to our build videos, but you're helping support 3 families. And who knows, we could keep growing. Okay, thanks again, and let's get back to that build.
I cut these pieces of PVC foam out on the table saw. Those are gonna go behind all this detail stuff here. And then this, I imagine, is some sort of tube. I'm thinking PVC pipe. So I'm gonna go and see about how wide it is. It doesn't have to be exact, but I can take this over to my PVC pipe and find one of a similar diameter. Clearly too big. This looks promising. That is a little big, but I think that's as close as we're gonna get, and I have lots of them. Well, that has a hole in it. I can put that on the back. There's a hole on that side. Never mind. There we go. These ought to work. Okay, did some more thinking. Britt found these, this rib tube thing, that was from a project from like a million years ago. So instead of using a long piece here and trying to cut these details in, we're going to have a core of this wood dowel, and this will go on. That's close enough for me. I'm okay with that. And then we'll have more chunks of PVC pipe along them. So we'll build this like that. So I need to cut more of these and more of these and then glue them on. So these tubes that go along the side have grooves cut through them, and the best way to do that is on something like a lathe, but this PVC pipe would be challenging to put in a lathe, so I 3D printed these little caps. The 3D print goes on the threaded rod. PVC pipe goes over it. The other print goes over that as a cap. Put a washer on it, a nut on it, tighten it down, snug this down a touch. And now I can spin this like so, and I'm gonna use my rotary tool to cut a little groove in there. Draw a line on it. And then carefully, very carefully, use my rotary tool. Once the groove gets started, it's a lot easier to hold it there too, but you do want to be careful. It's easier for this to want to jump away. While it's still on here, it's way easier to sand if I can just spin it. See? Clean up all the burrs in that crevice there. Like that. And then sand the rest of the surface down to 220. The only thing I can't do, I want to chamfer these edges, but I made my caps cover that, so I'll just have to do those later. So here's our dowel. All of these pieces will go on there in order, like so. This will eventually be, I think, hot glued on, but that is how those side pieces are gonna go. Those are gonna go on these back pieces. Before I start assembling all this though, there are bits that go on the end of it here. These doodads here, and there are 4 of them. One on the front and back and one on either side. So I'm gonna build one of them and then make 4 copies. So here's my rough design. I made it symmetrical. I'm not sure if the reference is, but since I want to make 4 copies, it needs to be symmetrical. If I was looking at it that way, this profile, that's what I've drawn right there. And I'm gonna make it a little bit smaller than the overall shape and then layer on top of it. For the base form, I've started with some MDF, also just cut down on the table saw. I've stacked a couple of 3/4 inch pieces and 1/4 inch piece to match the height of my drawing there. And these will all just get glued together. You could use wood glue. I'm probably just gonna use super glue because it's really fast. Okay, let's layer these first 2 together. There we go. So we got a block of MDF. I'm gonna take this over to the table saw and cut it down to dimension. Trying to figure out the angle I need to cut this because I'm gonna try and do it over on the table saw. So if the blade is up at like 90 degrees, I'm gonna 0 that, and then I'm gonna tip this until it is the correct angle there. I'm gonna call that 40 degrees. So this is an angle finder. I'm gonna put it on the blade and 0 it like that. And now I can tip the blade. I'm gonna put it on the other side and start over. There we go, we're at 0. Now I'm gonna tip this 40 degrees. Good enough. That looks pretty good. All right, I'm gonna be really slow and careful with this. I've set up my little vacuum form table here, my little vacuum form frame and a piece of styrene, and I'm gonna vacuum form a shell over this entire thing. And that'll become the next layer of detail on our piece. This will all make sense in just a second. All right, we've got some good sag. I think we're ready to go. Let's do this. Here, Britt, hit it. It ripped through down there, but that's okay. So this middle part here is gonna get removed in the final design. There we go. Oh. Little shell there. Okay, so I cut that out. This middle piece here goes away. Those will get glued on, but first I wanna cut this out. I scored all the edges of this rectangle and I also made a little crisscross pattern. I'm hoping I can get this to break out without, there we go, without snapping the piece I want to keep. And then this. There we go. Go in and just clean up all those edges. like that, and then we have our next layer of detail. This was the part we cut out before, and I'm actually gonna use that, because it fits pretty well over there, to do this detail, this sort of raised detail bit here. Just gonna trim this using some tin snips. Just like that. I've sanded both the surfaces that I'm gonna glue. I can spray this on the surface. There we go. All right. Do that, and this should just go right on. Just a couple little more details here. Little styrene accents. I'm gonna vacuum form more styrene on top of this piece here, and I'm worried that this styrene will stick to this styrene. Now this is thinner, hopefully it doesn't have to get as hot, but also I'm going to use baby powder as a release to hopefully create a nice barrier between the plastics so that they don't stick together. Just in general, this should help the vacuum form part come off easier. Go. Kind of ripped the corners a little bit there. I can fix that. There we go. It did come right out. There's a little piece. I can just make 4 more copies of that and glue it on my part. 3 more. Good math. 1, 2, 5.
3, sir.
3. And hit it. This is gonna hopefully get all fixed up. Tape that together. This was done pretty hastily, and the corners had a lot of webs and ripped a bit, so I've taped them shut, and then I'm gonna use this Weld Bond 3 and a little dispenser to weld these seams back together. Here we go. I'm just gonna drip a little bit in there. That's really all it takes. That'll evaporate and melt. These corners are glued back together, but I'm not confident they're gonna be strong enough, so got a little super glue here, and actually I have a little pieces of fiberglass cloth. I'm just going to glue those in place in the corner. Just use this little awl here to seat that in there. That looks pretty good. Hit it with a little accelerant. Boop, boop. And that should hopefully keep this corner from pulling apart. I have another piece of plastic here. I want to close the hole on the back of this. So that's going to go down over that. And then I will tape that down. And I got more of my Weld Bond here. And I'm going to run this along the edge between this piece and that piece, and it should make them into one piece. Time to put all of these pieces on this dowel, and I'm just going to use hot glue for this. I don't think I'll need very much. There we go, 1 down, 1 to go. These have had maybe half an hour to dry. I know they're not set all the way, but I think I can go in and do some trimming. Just trim away the excess on the bottom part here. Yeah, that worked out. So these end caps are going to slide onto these back parts. I need to cut a hole for that, and I want it to be above this bottom part. So I'm taking this and I'm lying it on a piece of styrene to hold it up a little bit, and then I'm going to put it where I think it ought to go. Then I will trace out where to cut. Right there. There we go. Just like that. Now I can put screws in the bottom and screws in the back. I do need to cut a hole there for this to slot into. For really thin stuff, a step drill bit is the best way to slowly get it up to diameter without, hopefully, without tearing it. Actually, do this just so I have a little bit of resistance behind it there. There we go, we got it started, and now I will slowly make that hole bigger. Now that's obviously too small, but I can bring it over to my rotary tool now and just slowly make that bigger until this fits. To attach these, I've laid out a couple spots where I'm going to drill some holes. So in the back of this part here, and then I will drill the corresponding holes in the back of this. Very carefully, thin material with a twist drill can get out of hand really fast. There we go. Now those are gonna go on here, and I've got some screws to attach them. Now that this is secure, I want to drive a couple more in the back of it. This tube needs to go in before I finish screwing everything else in. This goes in there. This goes in there. And now I screw this back in. I want to also screw this tube down. And that feels nice and secure. Little Scotch-Brite, rough it up. Time for priming! Over here at the scroll saw to cut a huge hole in the bottom of the base for our prop here. You'll see why I'm doing this in just a little bit, but for now, I'm gonna cut a big hole. Here's our hole. What could it possibly be for? Well, there is a symbiote in our tube, and I want to have something that I can kind of puppet. So here's the idea. I don't know if this is going to work, but we have some cloth. This is a two-way stretch fabric, so there's a little bit of stretch to it. And I think I want it to go in this direction. The idea is that this will be a puppet. It won't be blue. We'll make it colorful. But I can reach through and pretend that I'm the symbiote animated. That's the idea anyway. Let's see if I can make it happen. I'm gonna cut the fabric out a little bigger than the platform here, and I figure it'll end up bunching a bit and making it more wrinkled and textured. So let's cut it out. If you do any fabric work, I recommend getting one of these rotary cutter doodads because this is so much faster than using scissors. Dangerous. Yes, dangerous and faster. Carefully, very carefully. Oops. Whee! Oh, I missed one spot. There we go. But yeah, razor sharp, and then it goes nice and safe. So I think once this is ready, this will be bunched up on there. I am hot gluing little folds, like irregular folds into this so that it looks all lumpy. Let's just sort of fold that up and weigh it down. We also put some parchment paper down so that nothing sticks to it. I also have a bunch of elastic. This is like an elastic string. I have a really thin one here too. I figure we could glue some of these kind of haphazardly around to make it look like just more tendrils and alien goo things. I bet we can just tack these down with some hot glue. So I'm adding elastic instead of just normal string because I want everything to stay flexible and stretchy. Got a little tube of fabric here that was all hot glue. This is all being done with hot glue very quickly. I'm just twisting it and tacking it down to add a little bit of nice depth, texture to it. I also have more elastic strings here. Those are getting tacked down as well. Kind of folding everything in and out of itself too. I put a piece of insulation foam under here so that I could pin this down, and I can pin through this into the foam. Like so. Now this thing won't travel on us while we're brushing latex on it. Ready for that ammonia smell? Oh, it smells great. It's okay if there's a little texture in our final product, but I do want to thin this a little bit For the thinning, we have a little bit of distilled water. Normally, if I was gonna spray this, I would mix it 50-50 by volume, but we're not spraying this. We're gonna brush this on. We'll do a couple of different colors, but I have some black. This is just screen printing ink, very similar to acrylic paint. Normal acrylic paint would work too. That's probably enough. Now this is gonna look gray, but when it dries, it'll be black because the latex dries transparent. Like brushing latex onto fabric just seems like such a destructive thing. Today is a new day. We let this all dry overnight and it's just about ready to go. One thing about the latex is that it will want to stick to itself. So to give it a little more shine and to protect it and keep it from sticking, we're gonna hit it with some gloss spray varnish. So here is our symbiote creature. It's going in the tube, and I think we're just gonna hot glue it down. See how that turns out. Creature effects, not really my thing, so this is all very new to me. Here's our goo. It's in there, nice and secured. I think it looks all right for one of my first creatures, but it doesn't move really well. I think it's just a little stiff. It doesn't want to rebound back. It stays popped out. So what I'm thinking is a little elastic on the back to pull it back up. Here's my elastic. I've taken some screws out and I think I'm just gonna screw my elastic right in there and then sew it to our fabric. The elastic needs a hole in it. So I got my leather hole punch. Got a needle and thread here. Let's just stitch that to the elastic. There we go. We have a little more motion now. When I puppet it, it recoils, so it looks like maybe it's moving. It's time to deal with the clear portions of our venom tube. I've already cut out these. This is PETG, it's nice and flexible, and it is flexible that I can just sort of slot it right into where it's supposed to go and bend it around like that. When I'm ready to install this permanently, I could glue or screw that in like so. Now for this middle portion, I actually don't have a piece of PETG big enough, but I have acrylic. Now this is a little bit thicker and it doesn't bend as much as PETG does, so I'm gonna cut this down to size and then we're gonna try heat bending it. This paper, I think, was causing it to bend in a weird way, so it's all gotta come off. So here's my heat-formed sheet of acrylic. It's not perfect. It's very difficult to do this and make it look like it was machined. Obviously, if you had a plastic tube already the right size, that would be great. Those tend to be hard to find and expensive, so this is good enough. Took this piece off so I could snug it over that. That should hold that nicely. I have my PETG sheets as well. I can take the protective coating off of those. That looks pretty great. I'm thinking, let's see, these have to go on next, and I think what I'll do is drill a hole through these two clear things and through the metal, and then that'll drill a screw through the back of this into this PVC sheet. 1024 tap. Quick test. Good to go. There we go, there's our screw. A couple washers on it to hopefully clear these screws. It's working! Time to wire everything up for the lights. Cover that right up with some heat shrink tubing. Shrink it up. Awesome. It is time to wire the LEDs. It's not too complicated. I have my 9-volt battery and a little battery holder here. I have a switch to turn it on and off. We're just gonna connect the LEDs on this side to the ones on this side, to the switch, then to the battery. All in parallel, no math, right on. This is the red one. Ooh. There we go. Yeah, everything still lights up. Now I just have to glue this together, wire it up, wire it up, wire it up, wire it up, wire it. Just hot gluing my switch. This is a toggle switch on off, hot gluing it to my battery. I sanded the back of this so it's got a little grip, and then I'm just gonna hot glue it down. Right there. That still works. That still works. You didn't see anything. Okay, let's give it a shot. Ready? I'm not even gonna look. Isn't that beautiful?
It didn't turn on.
It turned on. It looks great.
The system fixed out.
Got my end caps here. I'm going to build the last sort of raised detail bit here out of more foam. Nice. I made a template for the notches out of these foam parts, and then I have to cut them out. It looks like this cut is perpendicular, these ones are at a slight angle. There we go. I think that looks a little short. That goes in there, and that'll wrap around there. There we go. Nice and snug. The last bit of decoration on these are these screw heads. So I spaced out some marks here. I'm drilling holes through the foam to put some decorative screw heads. This middle one's gonna be functional. It's gonna actually hold it on. So I don't want to drill that all the way through yet. Just a little recess for the screw head. Do a little heat sealing before plastic it. Ta-da! One of the last steps is going to be the detail pieces on these little windows. This is just some stencil vinyl that I cut out on the vinyl cutter. All right. Ah, it looks so good. Yeah. Yeah. If I did everything correctly, this should all fit together and I should be able to screw it in. All right. The rest of these little set screws are just gonna be pushed in. They're for decoration. I feel like I'm over-engineering this, but I need to support the bottom of this foam. So we're gonna attach another little aluminum L thing. These screws will go through there and poke out there, and these are threaded, so they should screw right in there. Awesome. Now if I lift that there, it's not all gonna go flying off. Nice and secure. Last step, just a little bit of weathering. In the reference, it's not very dirty, but I do want to add a little more contrast. I have some of my water mixable oil paints right here. These things are awesome. You can even thin them a tiny bit with just a little bit of water. I've got black and brown, a little phthalo blue, and titanium white. All right, and then I'm just gonna grime everything up. Especially anywhere that there's like nooks and crannies, anywhere that's gonna be a little grimy. My paper towel and kind of clean everything off a bit. Before, after. Got some silver acrylic paint here, and I'm just really lightly dry brushing some of these edges on the gunmetal parts to give them a little bit of edge weathering, just so there's some additional contrast. Just a little bit, just a little hint. That's it. Well, this might be one of the weirdest props I've ever made, but I think it's pretty cool. My symbiote tube from the new Venom movie that I haven't seen yet, but I hope is okay or better than the reviews are leading me to believe. Anyway, this was a really fun challenge. I put a lot of different techniques into this, and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. The creature effect is kind of neat. I can just puppet it from behind here with my hand, give it a little bit of movement. Obviously not as crazy pants as the CG they use in the movie, but considering I've never done anything like this before, I think it turned out okay. As always, all of the tools and materials that I use for this build will be found in the description down below. If you've got any questions about this build, please let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to get back to you. And again, thank you so much to our wonderful patrons. Your support helps us out so much, helps us pay for this space here and for the materials we need to make these awesome builds. If you'd like to join in on the fun, go to patreon.com/punishedprops. I'll be doing a short talk about this build, a little behind the scenes extra credit video over on Patreon. That's all I've got for you today. Thank you again so much for hanging out with me in the shop, and I will see you in our next build. So the 3D printed part goes on the threaded rod.
What was it? DC rod?
The threaded Rob. It's my twin brother Rob, but threaded. Everything's fine. Batting 1,000 today. I have a sneeze.